Founding a city in Civilization 7 is largely the same as it was in a previous game. Take your settler, or in this case, founder, and plop that thing right down, at least for your first one. However, one of the biggest changes to Civ 7, outside of course, this ages system, is the introduction of two types of settlement: city and town. And a lot of the time, you might be dealing with towns. Your first settlement will be a city, but the rest of them will almost always start as a town. There are a few exceptions, like with the late start, potentially with the legacy system, but generally speaking, when you place a settlement, it will be a town. But what about cities? What about that first one? Well, some things return from Civ 6, and some things have been reintroduced from perhaps previous games like Civ 5, or slightly more shaped in that direction. The specialists, for example, return, and they return in a big way. And one of the key differences is that cities can handle specialists. You can stack extra citizens on tiles to increase their yield, an incentive to grow up rather than grow out. And unlike their smaller counterparts, the towns, cities of course have their own fully complete, dedicated production queue. They are capped by an overall city cap, and generally speaking, this will be where you'll produce the slightly rarer yields. And in a recent short published by the official Civ channel, which I will link down below, they talked about towns versus cities, towns and cities. Here you can see the UI inside of the game. I'm sure you'll have some opinions on it. I've seen many in the comments, but this is of course what you would expect from a city. It's producing a wide variety of yield from influence to food, and you can build a huge variety of buildings within it, and you'll get everything, including some of the often, perhaps more city-specific yields. Again, like happiness. Not impossible to generate it in a town. Let's shift our focus then to those towns, because they are the thing that will separate Civilization 7 from previous additions to Civ. Though if you've played a game like Millennia, or many others, many older games potentially as well, you'll be familiar with this. It's kind of like a little satellite city on the outside. You build a town and it will connect up to a city. It won't be a fully fledged city with a fully fledged production queue. However, they will gather nearby resources, and as you can see, again returning to that previous short, these towns can also be specialized. This one has been specialized as a growing town, increasing the growth by 50%, and it can house many buildings, many of the same ones as cities, though they tend to be a little more basic. Towns also have a specialization focus bonus. Here you can see if you choose the growth one, your town will grow 50% faster, and normally all of their food will be sent to connected cities. They are a real satellite service to the city around them. Another important note is that generally all of its production will be converted into gold, where you can reinvest it as normal. And as you're seeing on your screen right now, we've already seen many leaders, many civilizations introduced to the game that have a real focus on towns or cities. I've played as Augustus in my brief, sort of 3-hour-ish early look at Civilization 7, and I loved the town synergy. Extra production in the capital for every town, and you get cheap buildings in your town. Here you can see plus 50% gold boost towards purchasing buildings in your towns. You can build these things up very quickly, connect nearby resources, build from a slightly more limited selection of things overall, but actually my takeaway was that these are great, and it will allow you to play quite wide without having too many cities to manage, to micromanage. Other leaders, including the recent one, of course, Confucius of Han China, also leans in, but more broadly to cities rather than towns, with a wonderful generic growth rate, as well as a focus on those specialists, those extra populations you can add to tiles. The districts within a city are also slightly different in this game, I would add. You can add often multiple buildings into the same. Outside of that extra specialization, growing up, not out, producing extra resources, it's also important, in fact, very important, to talk about those resources. The ones that are on the map, the gold, the sheep, the cows, the uranium, whatever it might be. One of the crucial parts of building towns and cities is to connect resources, and this is another area that Civilization 7 has taken a new crack at the existing formula. In this game, in Civ 7, resources will still generally provide the same benefits that they used to in Civ 6 or Civ 5. There's a focus, of course, on happiness, on keeping people happy, building toward those celebrations. But in this game, there are 3 categories of resource, and the categorization will depend on what it is, of course, its use, and its very interesting and seemingly quite varied in-game benefits. The 3 different types that you need to be across, in fact, let me throw them up on your screen: bonus, luxury, and imperial. That might not mean a lot, so let's replace it with this. A bonus resource can be placed in any one settlement. That means a town or a city. Luxury resources can only be placed in cities, and imperial resources share their benefit across the empire, an empire-wide benefit for that third type. And thankfully, the Civ gang had posted just recently a video on X, and we get a little bit of a look at this. Here you can see a settlement and a city, Roma capital, and a town below it. And you can see that some resources have been assigned. Wool, +2 production, and +2 happiness. We'll get a little bit of a look at each of these, so I'm going to slow it down and we'll take a look at each one. Next, cotton, providing +2 food and +2 production. It's unclear whether these are bonus or luxuries. I'd imagine bonus resources. Camels, interestingly, provide an increased number of resources that can be assigned to the city, so more slots, but that's it. And silk provides what seems like a really good +10% boost to the culture. Looking at the empire-wide resources, they provide things like production towards wonders in grassland. And again, every city, every settlement will see these benefits. Strategic things like iron, providing infantry units with +1 combat strength, or potentially gold, +20% gold towards purchasing buildings. These have been assigned in the empire slot, and they provide their benefit to all of your cities and towns. With that focus put to one side, we should probably now also just quickly focus in on trade, because you don't just use these resources and get those benefits for yourself, but trade returns in a slightly different way. And we're going to hear from the Civ team themselves, because I'd like you to listen to the quote. But just before we do that, I want to spend 10 seconds taking a look at this. This is the trade UI. Again, a very familiar kind of monochrome UI, simple to read, simple to understand. Now let's take a listen to how it works.
The trade system. You can build a merchant, and once you establish a trade route to another civilization settlement, you will get all of the resources at that settlement, and they will grant gold for the transaction.
You will get all of the resources at that settlement after you send a merchant to establish, to create a trade route. That seems really good to me. Even if it's some sort of dumbed down, slightly nerfed version of their effects, which they didn't allude to there, but I'm sure there's more to learn here, that seems like a really strong win. The other part that they mentioned at the end about they'll get gold in return, I assume that is just kind of how a transaction would work, right? So if I'm buying resources off you, I send my merchant, I establish the trade route, I get all of the benefits of the resource, and you get some money probably from me. And yet again, just like with the cities and towns, we've already seen a variety of leaders and civilizations introduced into the base game of Civilization 7 that really look to harness, to take advantage of these effects. Notwithstanding Hatshepsut, the leader of Egypt, +1 culture for every imported resource. So her leader focus, and as a gentle reminder, your leader will stay consistent throughout the whole game, it won't change like your Civ, that leader focus will just give you a flat benefit of culture as you move through. So everybody, what did we learn today as we move through this video? Well, firstly, we talked about the 2 different types of settlement in Civilization 7. Cities that largely return from Civilization 6 with districts, specialists perhaps more like Civ 5, and also those towns, those smaller satellite villages, towns, little settlements around the edges that connect up to your main cities, converting their production into gold for you to reinvest at a slightly more limited pool potentially of buildings or resources in those towns, or more generally in your cities, your main production centers for things like culture and science and more. We also talked about resources that will be gathered up by those cities and towns, with bonus, luxury, and imperial being the 3 resource categorizations in Civ 7. Bonus resources can be applied to any settlement, luxuries to one city, and imperial resources will see their benefits shared empire-wide. Civilization 7 looks to change up the formula, particularly from previous Civ games, though it is of course also borrowing concepts that won't necessarily be unfamiliar to you if you've played older titles or other strategy titles. It'll be interesting to see just how they play out. Let me know your thoughts and feedback down below. I'll see you next time.